Welcome to another episode of Rennch. On today's show, I've got a ton of Blasphemy build project updates and a bit of bodywork. Well, first and foremost, you might notice I'm not where I usually am. I've moved the entire Blasphemy build operation to the other side of the garage, where it was always meant to be. Now, I did that for a couple reasons, but the main reason I did it is because I installed a ton of overhead LED lighting when I first moved in 2 years ago. And I did that because I wanted it to feel like a paint shop, so I could paint in this room and see all the different angles of the car. Now that I'm in the bodywork process of this build, I was like, let me get this thing over to where it's supposed to be so I actually get proper lighting on the bodywork. Now, since I've seen you guys, I have done a ton of work on this car. So first and foremost, I put the car on those wooden dollies you guys have seen forever, but I added rolling dollies underneath. So now I can move the thing left and right and back and forth and clean underneath it and do all the things while it's just sitting here as a chassis. Secondly, I have painted the frunk. I know I mentioned it on the last video, but here it is in all of its glory. I've also painted the interior, which was a gigantic huge win, a watershed moment, as we like to say in the biz. It just looks so much better and so much cleaner, and it's feeling very dialed in now that it's there. Of course, I couldn't resist putting gauges in and putting my gas tank into the frunk and just sort of seeing what it's all about. You might also notice these really cool shelves that I got from Costa Mesa Collision. They weren't using them, and these have amazing storage for all my small parts that need to go on this car and all the big parts that need to go on top. So I've just thrown a piece of board on top, and I have all of the stuff I need for this car really available, which is great. Now, a lot of this stuff is going to be refurbished. I'm going to be Cerakoting a bunch of stuff and painting things and getting things ready as the car goes along. So the main focus of the car right now is all of the major bodywork, including the door gaps. That's a major deal that we're going to have to work through together. All the different shot lines, making sure things line up the way they're supposed to. And I just want the thing to look beautiful and smooth before more coats of primer go on. So I have one very thin coat of primer on this car right now. And basically I'm getting all the major body work done as much as I can. If you guys have been watching this build for a long time, you'll remember how much trouble I had with the front flares. I had to cut them apart multiple times. The metal got really thin. It's kind of warpy. So I have a ton of body work to do right there. I've got some door gap things I've got to deal with, especially on the passenger side. Like really right now is where the rubber meets the road. I've got to bolt the fenders on the way they're supposed to be bolted. I've got to get the doors aligned the way they're supposed to be aligned. And then I've got to get all of the door gaps correct. As a content creator, there's only so many ways I can show you sanding, but I will try to highlight the strategy behind it, the kind of sandpaper I'm using, etc. But just be prepared for a bunch of time lapse in the next couple videos. Nevertheless, here it is. The Blasphemy build is getting closer to paint, and let's get into it. So one tip when you're doing body work is if you wear gloves, you can actually feel the body a little better than when you're not wearing gloves. So right now I'm just trying to feel for some high spots and some low spots, but it's pretty good. It's not too bad. After that, sand. Alright, so I've done the entire panel now with 80 grit. It feels really good, but I'm going to definitely do some filler all the way along the weld line and then along the edge here. I'm using the Evercoat Z Grip, which sands really good, by the way. Let's get some on here and let it dry and see where we are. By the way, there's not a whole lot you can do about Bondo dust getting everywhere. I've covered up as much as I can, but like it's even on the Panamera, which is on the full other side of the garage, 1, 2, 3 cars away. It's all over the floor. I think the higher the grit, the smaller the dust, and it just goes everywhere. I've got a shop vac that I'm trying to use to mitigate as much as I can, but you just have to accept it as part of your life. Everything's gonna be dusty for a while. So really quick, I'm just gonna knock off the ridges I see with this block and this block, and then we're gonna get into guide coat, which I'm gonna show you guys in a second. The deal with Bodywork though is literally everything you see is going to come out in the paint. So it has to be perfect. There are no shortcuts in Bodywork. It is patience and perfection. Patience and perfection. So you just gotta deal and, you know, don't put in like hundreds of hours of work and then skimp on this part. Just spend the extra time, put your audiobook on. I'm on book 6 of The Dark Tower by Stephen King. What are you listening to? What are you reading? Tell me in the comments. So this is dry guide coat. It's this kind of charcoal-like powder. It might even be charcoal, I don't know. But the beauty of using the dry stuff is that it doesn't clog up your sandpaper. You can't use paint for this. So what you do is just put the guide coat on your panel. And what this is gonna do is gonna show us the high spots and the low spots as we start block sanding this thing. You basically can't get enough guide coat. In this case, I'm guide coating the filler, but we'll be guide coating all of the layers of primer as I go. This is what's gonna ensure that you have like a really flat, straight panel. Not that there's like a lot of flat on Porsches, but you get the idea. So the goal here is basically to get rid of the guide coat. We're gonna sand until the guide coat's basically gone, and this will show us any high spots and any low spots on the panel. If I can't sand the low spots, they will have to be filled. But that's the point of this exercise, is to see what needs to be filled and what can stay the way it is. Let me hit this for a couple seconds. I'm really just trying to reveal the high spots and the low spots more than anything else. I'll put a close-up on the camera so you guys can start seeing what I'm seeing here. Guide coat, especially this dry stuff, as you work your way up the different grits of sandpaper, will show you any scratch marks you have from the previous grit of sandpaper. So super important. All right, let me show you guys this in close. So this is a perfect example of how guide coat works. These spots, this dark spot here, this dark spot here, these are low spots on the panel, which means I've got to sand all of this stuff flat enough so that these low spots disappear. And if they're too low, meaning if I start hitting metal, so I've gone all the way through the primer, I'm down to metal, that means I need to use a little bit more filler on this because there's not enough filler to fill in the low spot necessary. I've got the wrong tool here. And it's also very hard to do one-handed. Okay, this thing is buttery, buttery, buttery smooth now. Certainly smooth enough for its next couple of coats of primer. Now, technically, I'm not supposed to be wiping it with my bare hand, but if you could only feel it, you guys, it just feels great. So, I'm gonna call this one done for primer. So I'm going to keep moving on and start working on this rear flare section and literally do the same exact thing I just did. So this is the part of the video where I lost my audio. Really, it's the rest of the video where I lost my audio, but also don't wear a black hoodie when you're working on Bondo. It's just a terrible idea. Now the car turned out great. All of the bodywork went really well, and the car looks fantastic, though a bit bespeckled. It will all level out great when the primer is on, not to worry. But now is the time that we need to start working on door gaps. Now my buddy Zeke tells me that the gaps on a Porsche are done back to front. And I'm going to trust him because he's been building these things for a very long time. So what that means basically is that at the rocker area, you're trying to get a 4mm gap from the bottom of the door to the top of the rocker. And then the back edge of the door to the chassis also wants to be 4mm. Thankfully, I happen to have a factory workshop manual that I also got from my buddy Zeke. Odd Job Fix, by the way, on YouTube. He's an amazing woodworker and an all-around great handyman and a fountain of knowledge. Anyway, I have a factory manual that I call on during times like this. I got the information I needed, I think, and now I'm going to try to start setting these door gaps. So a couple things about this first setup. One is that every door has the opportunity to have spacers, and they go between the hinge and the chassis of the car. Then you'll notice I have a bucket and a little bottle jack, and that is to support the weight of the door while I need to make these minor adjustments. So basically, you go back and forth. The big issue with this particular door is the trailing edge of the door was sticking out from the chassis like a 1/4 inch. So there was a bunch of trial and error twiddling until I got it really, really close. So the move here is to take off all but one hinge bolt on top and one hinge bolt on the bottom. Get your door adjusted the way you want, and then plug in the other 4 hinge bolts. So the rest of this is just to try different things back and forth, moving the hinges, feeling the bottom of the door until I got it the way I wanted it. And eventually I just kept getting closer and closer until it's really, really close now. I feel really good about once everything is all bolted together and everything is painted one color, you're going to see a really great door gap. All right, guys, I'm redoing my outro because my microphone failed, but that was rad. After a really long 3 weeks of Panamera breaking and problems with the Gray Ghost, all my cars were broken. And I had the red car to do the flares on, and I had some other work stuff to do. Just a lot of delays to get to this point. I had never done door gaps before, and I think they turned out great. If anything, I can correct any little niggles if we get down to that point, but I'm really, really happy with how it all turned out. So thank you guys for watching this video. On the next show, I'm super excited because we are going to be working on the taillights, the modification of the integrated 3D printed 911R LEDs, which is really the final piece of the bodywork on this car. So definitely stay tuned to the next episode, and thanks so much for watching.